Good to be here. Thanks. That's a nice way to start.
Pretty cool.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful research. It makes me think sometimes when if you watch prey species, when they get hunted, so they go through different levels of awareness. The first level is they see the animal and you feel their whole body tighten, see the predator, then want to keep eyes on the predator and start to alarm call. And then if they get chased in any way, they'll run away. They'll make sure they get to a good, fair distance away. And then the first thing they do is they take a deep breath out. And you see them like that out breath totally resets them. And so it's just beautiful to watch that like long out breath immediately into a state back of relaxation. And then like no verbal mind. So no like, oh my God, this is dangerous. We could get hunted again. We might get hunted tomorrow, and we got hunted yesterday. The world just like back into a total state of presence. And the same on the predator side, this like intense awareness. And one of the things that I love about lions, thinking about your work, is that they have this incredible capacity to rest. You watch, these guys are like an elite killing unit, sleep for 17, 18 hours of the day. And mostly when you see lions, what you just see is like a piece of like tawny skin sticking out from under a bush, resting. But when they change gear into hunting mode, so late evening as it starts to cool off, they're in tune with their environment. They know they're heading into night. They've got extreme night vision, and that their level to operate at night goes way up. Gets cooler, they get up, they bond with each other. They create a connection. Lions are the only social cats. So first bonding, connection, they get like really connected with each other, and then the hunt starts. And when that hunt starts, it's just like their level of focus just goes straight up, and then they are prepared for high levels of intense, explosive activity. Just like in the most incredible athletes you've ever seen. Just imagine you took out a lion's teeth and you took off its claws. You still have a 400-pound athlete that can run the 100 meters in 4 seconds. So just the contact is incredible. Get out, hunt. If they hunt buffalo, there's this incredible sense as they operate together. Now they're taking on, an 800 kilo, so a 1,600-pound beast. And they know if they grab a hold of it, the others are going to be there to help them. It's an extreme undertaking, high levels of energy expenditure, explosive power. Feed, boom, pulse back into deep rest.
Yeah.
So they have this and you just watch that rhythm. And actually, if you look into the wild, that's what you see. You see this like perfect use of energy usage, like everything, just the direct amount of energy for every single thing. High intensity, boom, pulse into rest. High intensity, pulse into rest. Just to kick off with some primal stuff from the wilderness that we're just learning to incorporate into our lives now. I mean, in comparison to this culture, which is just like go, just like the championship of just push.
Yeah.
And losing that ability to like really pulse into deep nervous system, parasympathetic.
And there's like a subconscious, perpetual, self-imposed or culturally imposed obligation to always be going.
Totally. I mean, what do we applaud the most? Caffeinated, first in the door, last out. The A type of that go
Yeah.
is the thing that is like, it's what's championed in this culture. It's what we think like that's what successful looks like. And almost all, like most of the top CEOs who I've coached, one of the biggest things has just been like, you're not pulsing into any kind of recharge. And so on a timeline, we're starting to get diminishing returns. And it is so profoundly difficult for them to just get into the mindset of like, resting is a part of being really great at whatever I'm doing.
How I want to keep going down that track. And how do you describe your job title? Who are you? What was your childhood like? Like, what's the elevator pitch of who the hell Boyd Varty is?
Well, I have a pretty weird Venn diagram nowadays. I'm a tracker, I'm a storyteller, and for the last 15 years or so, I've been very involved in transformational processes. But it began for me, I grew up in the wild eastern part of South Africa, and I grew up on a property called Londolozi Game Reserve, which is a reserve that my great-grandfather bought in 1926. And my family went there to hunt for 3 generations. And then my father, my uncle, and my mother underdid a huge restoration project on the land. And they sort of restored the land from a bankrupt cattle farm into the thriving wilderness that it is now. And so that's what I grew up into, a place where humans were rebuilding their connection with nature, a place where trust was being rebuilt between people and animals. It's now probably the #1 safari destination in the world, the best place in the world to see leopards. And so I grew up there on the land, inside of that consciousness of being connected with the natural world. And from the time that I was very young, I was learning the art form of tracking, and from these incredible Shangaan trackers, how you actually find the tracks of an animal and follow it across a wild landscape.
And tracking is historically would lead to hunting, but the way that you guys do it's just tracking for tracking's sake.
Historically, most tracking was around hunting, and that's from our early ancestry and then into the early days of the safari business. But once the safari business transitioned to ecotourism, the opportunity to view animals, photograph animals, be in their presence without harming them, tracking took on a whole new meaning. The ability to go out into a huge wilderness, follow and find animals, and then use your radio, your walkie-talkie to let people know that we've discovered this leopard, and then people could come in and have an opportunity to view that animal. So I would say that in some ways, the intensity of the safari business, the fact that we operate 360 days a year in all weather, has actually meant that the ability of trackers has gone up in our operation because they're on the land so much more. They know the terrain. If you can imagine, a primal hunter would have gone hunting maybe once a month, twice a month. These guys are out every day following. So their skill in the art form has just been developing at exponential rates.
Yeah.
So the tracking that I grew up in was to find animals, to protect animals, and that was really my life. Growing up in South Africa, safaris, tracking, being out on the land, watching this incredible connection that was being built between people and animals. And then later in my life, whilst I was still working as a safari guide, I met my first mentor, and she was a woman by the name of Martha Beck. And she, at that time in my life, I was in a pretty bad state. And she started guiding me, and she started helping me find my way from a very frozen and depressed place where I had, through a series of traumatic events, found myself. She started to help me find my way back to my mission. One of the things that she taught me was that there's nothing more healing than finding your gifts and sharing them. And so she started to show me how the art of a transformational process worked. And as that was happening, I started to realize that the mindset and the approach of the tracker has a lot to do with finding your way. And so I started to incorporate this strange art form and sort of unexpected art form I had learned as a child with transformational processes. And that's when my work started to really find its kind of nexus between those two things.
Could you share one of the more pivotal trauma moments you had in Johannesburg, where that you had like someone broke into your house, and that was kind of like an inciting moment, like a pivotal kind of path?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I had a few encounters with severe trauma, but by quite some margin, the worst one was the early 2000s, and South Africa was still in a very, very unstable place. At that time, violent crime was very, very high. And one night we had a small house in Johannesburg that we would base towards the land, which was 5 hours away. So if we were coming through town or we needed to go through town, we would base there. And myself and my mother and my sister and a woman who was living with us at that time, who was actually my sister and my teacher, were involved in a home invasion, which was, just the most utterly terrifying experience of my life, to wake up with, these 3 women in my life tied up at gunpoint. And I was literally, they were the last to wake. So I woke up with a gun in my face, and actually my sister grabbing me and just saying, "We're okay, we're okay." And just this like unspeakable flush of adrenaline through my body. And then like just trying to control it, understanding you got to be calm here. But I would say like in some ways that the scope of that first release of adrenaline, like it set up the next 20 years of trying to get my nervous system back online. It was just so much energy and so much hormone through one system that it just shut everything else down. Oh. And so that experience was absolutely terrifying, to be out of control like that, to be at the mercy of guys who are clearly severely traumatized themselves. There were directions that those South Africans knew, that there were sort of directions that those sort of encounters went, often into the sexual assault space, often into the murder space. So it was just like utterly terrifying. And so that part of the experience was a kind of a negotiation for 3 hours, and a kind of a game of energy in ways, like using your energy to create a feeling. Not that I had any consciousness of this at the time, but like an instinctual sort of sense of when to be aggressive, when to be back off, when to fawn, when to fight. And the culmination of that was eventually I was taken outside. I was still tied up, and they told me that they were going to kill me. Took me outside into the kind of driveway area, put me on my knees, execution style, put the gun into my mouth. And in that moment, it's just something happened. And again, I didn't have the consciousness for it at the time, but since, when I've spoken to teachers about it, and teachers of Zen and teachers of spirituality, I think what happened is there's a certain point where the fear and the intensity of an experience gets so high that the ego just stops. It's almost like the psyche can't maintain its ego state, and the ego dropped, which would be a kind of a satori or a samadhi experience. But for me, it was just suddenly, in a moment, all fear went away, like right on the brink. And it's like I just couldn't even hold fear anymore. And when that fear dropped, there was just no story over what was happening. And what occurred in that moment is I just made a profound connection with my assailant. And we connected, and we looked into each other's eyes for a moment, and there was just an incredible connection, love. Something happened between us in that moment. And when that happened, it just got absolutely weird. Like everyone just put their guns down, and there was a kind of weird, glimmered, just confusion that happened. Everyone just sort of stood around, and I stood up with my hands still tied, and I told the one guy to untie me. He untied me, and I went and got the car keys, gave them our car keys, and I said, "You guys must go now." And they just, in the same like confused state, like got in the car and drove off. And it was bizarre. And for the next years, I had such PTSD, and I was like integrating two things that, I've only, as I keep saying, like I only caught up with some kind of understanding of what was occurring much later. But one, I was integrating just the amount of fear and the PTSD of that. And then on another level, I was integrating the confusion of something I had glimpsed, something that had happened, which I had no idea. I knew that something extremely strange had happened, and I was confused about how I could be so afraid and then suddenly so unafraid. And that sort of set me up for a period of like anxiety, confusion, but also like a draw to the mystical. And in some ways, that was the beginning of my journey into like healing and the mystery.
It's almost like Neo discovering he can bend bullets.
It did feel like it was a glimpse of something beyond 3D reality, I was like,
it feels like wherever your consciousness was at that time, you were at like preschool, or kindergarten or whatever, which I think ultimately that's pretty much where most of us are. And then in that moment, it seems like almost you got jumped forward to college.
Yes.
And then dropped back to where you were at, and you're like, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah, totally. It was like that. It was like I saw something, and then I had to try and work out what that was. And, then in subsequent years, as I started to really work with firstly my own process of working through that, and then a physical trauma that I had later where I got bitten by a crocodile and my leg got absolutely mangled, and I thought I was going to die that day too. So I had those two kind of core traumas that then as I started to work through, like all trauma, it started to become a doorway into a different level of understanding and a guide really into my healing path.
What do you think that was, that moment between you and the assailant?
I think a few things. I do think that I experienced a kind of ego dissolution. People talk about ego death, and I think that was a dropping of the ego death. And so the I, the identity of I fell away. And when it fell away, what there was is just a single thing looking at itself. So the language starts to break down because we fall into the realms of the mystical here, but it was awareness looking at itself as a separate point of awareness. And when those two awarenesses of the same thing in different bodies saw each other, it just became absolutely ridiculous to assault itself. Wow. And I think that my consciousness sort of in that moment pulled us all into a different level of awareness in the field almost. And it was just like you would never cut your own hand off. So it was just like pure awareness, and suddenly we all were aware of the fact that we're all one consciousness manifest into different form. And it's a well-known experience in the mystical traditions. It's a well-known experience in the Eastern traditions. If you Zen meditation categorizes different experiences like this. It's everywhere in the Enlightenment awakening literature. And that helped me a lot. But posthumously at the time, it was just extremely fearless, beautiful, and it didn't last. Eventually, I dropped out of it. But in the moment, I was absolutely fearless. It was so clear to me that I could not be killed, or that awareness is unkillable. The form of the body could go, but whatever that was, that timeless, untouchable state of awareness was immortal in every sense.
Followed by nervous system being in a free state.
Followed by dropping out of whatever that state was, and just being totally, not being able to sleep, being hypervigilant, just being fully aware, sitting anywhere where I would watch the door, making sure things were locked multiple times anytime I was in an urban environment, standing with my back to the wall, feeling hyper protective and disempowered around the woman in my life. The feeling of both I hadn't been able to protect them, and now my job was to be level 10, never let that happen again.
Sounds like the teachings of Andrew Tate. Are you familiar with him at all?
I mean, I know he's an internet kind of guy, right?
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that you're saying is the things that he kind of advocates for.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. He's his present belief is that, whoever is out to assassinate him, and he always makes sure that his back is up against a wall, and, very protective, and all of the different...
That's hypervigilant for sure.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And, I think that it's probably good to have some of that as a good warrior, but the problem is when you can never switch it off, it starts to barbecue your system a bit. If you can never get yourself to drop and you're just always there. For me, certainly, it was just wearing me out, that level of constant anxiety and adrenaline in the system. And I just I could never find a safe enough space to process it. So on a time period, it started to just sap me and make me very guarded and just make me very shut down. So it was, certainly that level of awareness is helpful. It's helpful in dangerous situations. It's helpful in combat situations. But if you can't switch it off, it starts to eat you. So you have to work how to pulse out of it.
Yeah, you want to have it as a gear, but not your entirety of your gear set.
Yeah, you don't want that to be the only gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you then met Martha Beck. Is that her name?
Yes. Yes.
and she was able to see something in you.
Yeah. So
What do you think she was able to see? How do you think she was able to see it? And what was that? What was that interaction?
Well, Martha was an incredible healer. She came on safari, and I turned out to be her guide. What had happened is a friend of mine had said he had taken her on a safari the year before when she was touring South Africa. And he had said, she's an amazing woman, martial artist. And he just got a great vibe from her. And he said, if she's coming, you should be her guide. So I went into the guide room where you used to write your name down with the safari guests who were coming in. And I rubbed off someone else's name and I put my name down to be the guide. And that moment absolutely changed my life. It's amazing how like a single moment can pivot your whole life. She came on safari, and early on in the safari, she said something that like I felt grabbed my system, which was the transformation of the planet will come out of a profound shift in human consciousness. I was driving the safari truck, and when she said that, I felt my whole attention turn to that. Like something in me was like, that has something to do with me. That whatever you just said, like that's something to do with my path. And then later we had this moment where we were standing in the car park of the camp where people stay when they're on safari, and she just looked at me and she said, I can see what's going on with you. And at first I was almost confused. I was like, I'm the safari guide. She said, I can see how stuck and frozen you are and how much you're carrying, and I'm ready to talk to you about it. And at first I was like a little bit shocked, and then as she said it though, I felt it. And I started to like crack internally, and then I just started crying in the parking lot, standing there like meant to be the macho guy. And she just grabbed me and she hugged me, and from that moment on, she started to teach me how to be in a healing process. And she was an incredible woman. She was a Harvard professor. She had done 2 PhD degrees, I think, at Harvard, and she had done tons of sociology, where she had done group work where she would, as a sociologist, would stand behind the glass and she would watch how groups interact with each other. So she had an incredible understanding of group dynamics. And then she had gone to Thunderbird University in Arizona, and she had taught a course on how to interview well. And her theory that she taught was the way to interview well was to really care about what you were interviewing for. So, years before life coaching, she had taught a course and designed a course to help people get in touch with what really touched them, what moved them, what they felt drawn to. And then one day she read about herself in the paper as America's first life coach. This is like early 90s, so way ahead of the game, even before really life coaching was a thing. And from that day, she had run hundreds of processes and getting people to tap into a deeper level of their awareness of patterns, the transformation of patterns, all of that stuff that is sort of becoming commonplace now. She was doing, for 20 years before anyone else started really getting into it. So from that moment, she started to teach me the first thing that she really taught me was how to live from a different kind of somatic awareness in my body. And I was just like trying to do everything that I should be doing, trying to do it right. And she started to teach me how to just be attuned to my body's energy, how my body said yes to something, how my body said no to something. And then she just started to say, you just start moving towards what actually makes the body feel energetically alive and expansive. And, that's just how I began. And there was so many things that I was doing out of obligation. There were so many things that I was doing because that's just what you did. And that first awareness became the beginning of a journey. And every time I would watch her work, I would feel myself become more alive and more energized. And I started to realize that was my body's way of saying, that's your path towards that. Just move towards that expansive, alivening energy, whatever it takes to move towards that. And so for the next about 10 years, I traveled with her extensively. I watched her run workshops. I was just, everywhere where she was doing work, I was there. And I just watched a master work for 10 years. And same time, I was going through deep transformation. So I was both learning it through watching the art form, learning the tools of transformational practices, and also going through it myself. And so that was giving me a much deeper level of understanding of it. And that started to set my course. And, as I was saying, when we met at the Fit for Service workshop the other day, it's like, you can't go to university or you can't take a course in how to become a tracking, storytelling, coaching, transformational village awakener, village consciousness awakener. Like, that is literally a path that has been created out of this art form of just following where the energy is for me. And it's just taken me into something that now is a business, now is my life's work, now is what I serve. But it didn't come out of just saying that's the vision. It came out of a whole lot of small steps and tracking my way towards that.
It seems like culture presently is going through a similar experience from a nervous system level that you had been going through, in like this perpetual state of distraction and busyness and go, and maybe you could use like the term bypassing or avoidance, all these avoidance strategies.
Yeah.
I was just in the sauna a second ago, and I was listening to a guy's conversation, and he was saying, it's like, oh man, yeah, like really busy with work. Love being busy with work.
Yeah. And
to me, I hear that, and part of me is like, oh wow, like good for him. Like, that's cool. Like, I want that, and then the guy he was talking to was, I guess, I don't know, kind of empathetic or sensitive. And he asked him more questions, and then eventually came out where it's like, oh yeah, if I'm not busy, I get depressed.
Yes.
And you can run that pattern for 40, 50, your whole life.
Yeah, 100%.
Or you can come to a place where you actually, start lifting rocks up.
Yeah.
But it could be fucking terrifying to start doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's a profound difference between being on the run from a feeling state that you don't want to be in, and even like, all these incredible practices that we have, it can all just be ways to not feel what I'm feeling. Now, that's not to say that it's not wonderful to be deeply engaged in your work and have a great set of life architectural practices. But if they're just medication and you're not addressing the core, then eventually it's going to catch up with you, So it's like at a certain point you have to work out how to go down and find out what's driving that, and how you could start to move to a different way of being, a different baseline. Otherwise, it's just medication. It can be cake, drugs, exercise, cold plunges. It can all be like really like invigorating for you. It can be structuring. It can add to you, or it can just be medication to keep you out of like the deeper thing.
And then it's like Jung paraphrased. He has various versions of this quote, but essentially like the deep, dark, unconscious aspects of yourself will be made manifest in your material world.
100%.
And the deeper and darker and denser, the gnarlier they're going to express themselves in your world.
And trauma will always recreate itself.
Yeah.
Until it's addressed, and it will create itself by manifesting that chaos on some level externally. And so one of the ways that that you've started to move through trauma and you've started to actually heal is that your external life starts to reflect that. If you talk to someone who's really carrying a lot of stuff, you can hear my car broke down, I got hit by a car, and then my dog got run over, and then this person left me, and and that's not to say we don't have periods of turmoil in our lives, but when it's consistent, there's something internal that has to happen first.
And so how, in your experience, how did you get to a point where you started to get some clarity? I know there's another story that I've heard you tell about what's it called? What's it called when you bring the rocks in? Yeah, bring the ancestor rocks in.
Oh, the sweat lodge.
Sweat lodge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was kind of like a new beginning type moment for you. You could, if you're open to telling that story, or just like, what was your process on coming to a point of lightening your load?
Well, it was a few things. First, there was an awareness that actually I was carrying some stuff that was, trauma is also a narrowing of options. Almost always it comes with a narrowing of options and choices and a feeling of being frozen.
And literally myopic vision.
And literally myopic vision as a part of that.
Vasoconstriction.
And the inability.
Physiology represents
100%. Yeah, it's all a tightening.
Yeah.
So.
And high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And all it's so beautiful. Like the body literally is an instrument. It's just 100%. It's expressing your emotion.
100%. So yeah, I first had to acknowledge that I was severely traumatized with this PTSD. I was frozen. Depression is usually about the past, and literally a depressed state of emotion. Part of that was because I grew up in a very masculine society where, you just got on with it. You didn't express a lot of emotion. So I had a backlog of things that were stuck. It was stuck in the nervous system. It was feelings that were being suppressed. It was a story that I was telling of like, doesn't matter what happened, I need to push forward. And all of that had hardened and solidified me into this kind of depressive state, and actually depressive and anxious in some ways. So then I started working with Martha, and slowly I started to find a space where I could actually process that. The first part of that being the acknowledgement that there were things that had happened that had frozen me, and finding a safe enough place to start to let that out. Then starting to let go of all of the obligations and move towards the things that gave me energy. And the development of a set of tools to work through all of that frozen stuff. So that became absolutely critical, and I started to just live on that. One thing that I would ask myself is, given any situation, did it feel shackling or freeing? And just starting to choose to move towards things that felt freeing. And then usually thoughts would come in about why you can't just do that. And then I learned to question my thoughts. And so that's where I started to work through the limiting beliefs. And that's where I started to see how this process works. It's awareness, tools, practice through time is the transformational process. And the through time is important because it's almost never instant. You have to be generating awareness, starting to learn to make a different choice on that timeline. So I was living like that. I was practicing that. And then I started getting introduced to ceremony work. And a ceremony is a place, one of the great definitions of ceremony is a place to remember to remember. And what are you remembering in a ceremonial space? Well, you are remembering not just what happened to you, but you are also taking the opportunity to remember what's good in your life and remember how you were. It's almost like you are going down under the layers to something pure inside of you. And ritualizing that. And part of ritualizing that is the discovery of what's sort of been layered on top of that and expressing it. And that's where the drum comes in and the screaming comes in and the release comes in. And my first encounter with that was at a Navajo sweat lodge. And I was taken there by an incredible healer by the name of Coelle Simpson. She took me, and there was a medicine man called Daryl Slim who was running the Hogan. And it was kind of like, I had no experience of this. It was on the outskirts of Phoenix. We went out there and it was this kind of like blanketed Hogan, and the medicine man arrived from his job in construction, and it was like the mystical right up against practical life, as it often is. And then we went into the sweat lodge and we drank the medicine, and I just remember the incredible intensity of the heat building.
Was it San Pedro, or what did you drink?
That was peyote. Yeah. I just remember the intensity of the heat building, and I remember clearly the feeling of all of these defense patterns of be strong, just be strong through it was playing out, and I was trying to just be strong enough to handle the heat. Yeah. But the heat was relentless, and then the songs were building, and people were singing, and as the energy was building in there into this like incredible intensity, and I could feel like energy trying to rise out of me, and I was still trying to like armor myself against the heat. And then this incredible slideshow started to come. I started to flash back, and I started to see my mother tied up, and I started to see the gun in my mouth, and I started to see my leg when it came out the water and the crocodile had bitten it and just mangled. And I started to see the look in the eyes of my sister, and it was just flashing. This incredible like slideshow. And I felt myself starting to get like, I felt like I was losing my mind, and the heat and the screaming and the drums, and a woman started to wail next to me, and it's totally black, and I'm like hallucinating. And then the vision changed, and it switched into a beautiful savanna clearing in the African afternoon. And I was sitting in the clearing, and the sun was setting, and it was just like infinitely quiet, and the wild that I had grown up in when I was young and when I was innocent and when I was pure. And I was that boy back in that wild place. And in the vision, a leopard appeared, and our land is famous for leopards. This one single female leopard appeared, and she walks through this beautiful, like, short green grass of this clearing, and she walks up to me in the vision, and she just bumps her head against me. And just like in a very feline greeting, she bumps her head against me, and I look up in the sky, and I see this Battler eagle, which is an eagle that is kind of a totem to our family, and then, boom, back into the sweat lodge, and back to screaming, wailing, and it's like it went silent for a moment, and then fully back into this, like, the sound, the drums, the screaming, and then the slideshow started again, just horrific images, hospital, drips, being medevaced out of the land, just like all of it, and just building. And then I started to purge, and I passed out. And when I woke up, I was lying outside of the sweat lodge, and someone had raked up some leaves, and I was like, somehow I had been carried out and dropped into the leaves, and I was like lying in this pile of leaves, like in it, not even on it. Like, it was just like everything was all over me, and the smell of crushed leaves and the earth, and I could feel a kind of vibration in the earth. And I like half turned over, and there was a Navajo man standing over me who had been tending the rocks, these two beautiful plats, and he was just pouring water up and down my spine. And I was saying to him, I'm dying, I think I'm dying. And he was saying to me, no, brother, you're just being born. And there was a vibrational, like, thronging through my body that felt like it was coming from the earth. And eventually, like, I just fell into this, like, profound state of peace. And that was my first kind of venture into ceremony work. And really, when I eventually sat up, he said to me, you've been to the other place to get the medicine, and over the next few days, it's going to start coming clear to you. And it took like the next probably like 3 weeks or so. This vision kept coming through, and the vision became the central vision of my life, which is that there is a way that all things heal, from innocence to being broken to restoring itself to a state of Eden, the symbolic internal Eden of the world, the natural world, a state of pristine naturalness. And in some ways, a healer's journey is from that state into being broken, and it's the being broken and traumatized that is the source of the medicine. And then that the healing in the self becomes the journey back into a different level of Eden, but not a naive Eden, and not a naive innocence, an innocence that you find your way back to with medicine, an innocence you find your way back to in the face of horror. And there is something about that becomes real healing power. And so that personal journey for me, back from like something fragmented to something natural, also became the core of my work. The idea that when any of us heal, when any of us face our demons and really do the work of becoming attuned to our gifts, our essence, sharing that essence in the world, almost always that experience is accompanied by a profound sense of enoughness. I am enough. I have enough. People like that usually simplify their lives. They become focused on being creative. They become deeply attuned to helping and serving others. They usually feel a profound desire to go back to nature. And a lot of what I sense is happening now is as people heal and that feeling of enough takes place, that is the doorway to the restoration or the creation of a new way of being with the natural world. And so to me, on some fundamental level, individual, personal healing has something to do with healing our relationship with nature. And as we connect more with nature, it opens a doorway for us to heal in different ways. So there's this kind of beautiful infinity loop. Heal the self, change the relationship with nature, connect with nature, find opportunities to heal the self. And that's the core of what I do now.
That sounds pretty perfect. Like, that sounds right.
That sounds right, right?
Sounds right.
Yeah, that's what I'm up to.
The alienation that a person can experience from nature, like that, like one of the things that I've heard you say in that very idyllic situation by the huge bonfire at the Pit for Servicemen the other day, is a person goes to nature. They think they're going into nature to get to know nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then another perspective or experience could be, it's actually to get to be known by nature.
Yes.
And that like congealing of self in relation to the world around, particularly like the natural world,
Mm-hmm.
world compared to like maybe the technological world or your cell phone or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever. It seems like there's something very valuable about that. And it's I wonder if that's, I like that as an idea of like a hallmark of a person that is a more integrated person, like feeling safe to go outside and feeling like a yearning in that relationship of like, I want to be around the trees. I want to be around,
Totally.
compared to like, oh, it's dirty, it's gross. Like, oh, I don't,
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think that the more in touch you get with your own nature, into that state of belonging, the feeling of like, okay, there's an infinite intelligence here in the natural world, and I'm a part of that. And then if you start spending a lot of time in nature, this feeling that it is aware and sentient and that it is somehow aware of you, that feeling of belonging is profoundly healing. So I would say that people who get more in touch with their own nature become more attuned to nature. And if you put your attention on living things, it's almost as if more aliveness can flow into you. The more you stare into screens and technological things, it's almost like it starts to format you into a more technological, mechanistic way of being. Whereas the natural world takes you into this incredible sense of interconnectivity. You know, when I was young, there was this incredible ecologist, and he taught my father how to look at a tree, and then my father taught me how to look at a tree. And so when I was young, my father would say to me, okay, look at that tree, tell me what you see. I'd say, I see a tree. He would say, no, look more deeply. And then with some coaching, I would start to see that if you look closely, you would see that that tree, its branches are throwing shade. And that shade is allowing these shade grasses to be expanded underneath it. And the fact that there's denser shade grass underneath the tree means that it's anchoring more nitrogen into the soil. So it's actually, the tree is able to pull more nutrients and water up the tree and synthesize it into fruits. And those fruits are drawing in monkeys. And those monkeys are acting as delivery systems for that plant's essence. And as those monkeys jump around in the trees, they drop branches. And that's allowing the antelope that browse but can't get to those leaves to come in. And as you start to look at it like that, you are staring into this incredible interlocking web of intelligences, and you start to become attuned to how everything touches everything. And if you meditate on that long enough, the understanding that that intelligence that is tying that all together, you are fundamentally a part of that intelligence. And it stops being a mental awareness, and it starts becoming a felt experience. And I think that the minute you touch that, in a very, very strange way, you become more human.
Yeah.
And I think that in some ways we're on a trajectory with technology that is, it's like dehumanizing to the essence of what it means to be human. And the natural world somehow pulls us back into a different layer of the meaning of being human. And it's important because meaning is structured into that way of living. When you are living relationally as opposed to comparatively, somehow that pulls you into a very, very different way of making meaning with yourself, with how you live, with what the world is. And that meaning is what we're losing in this culture, that ability to be meaning makers.
I think it can be overwhelming for a person that perhaps wants to like make a difference in the world, and they want to, start a charity or whatever the thing is. And perhaps they might feel a little powerless of like, what can I do to make this difference? And that was another question that somebody had asked you as they asked that exact question, like, how do we like lead someone into more depth within themselves or this work or all of that? And your response was just to do it within yourself.
Oh my goodness. I would say that my idea of modern day activism is to become someone who lives on the track of your own life. So you really work out what it would mean to go inward and find your way to your gift, your purpose, your essence. Because it's incredible what happens around a person who's found that. And it's not that they are directing people, this is what you should be doing. It's that at a deeper level, when you're around someone who's really in their essence, really in their mission, you can feel it in them. And there's something about their life that you look at it and you feel yourself lean forward in your chair and you feel like you can just feel the depth of it. And it starts to wake you up to what's possible. And so I'm really for an activism of self-healing and self-discovery and what starts to occur out of that. Because I've just seen it, I mean, just look around the Austin community, those who really find their path, amazing things starts to happen around them. And almost always the discovery of those gifts and a spiritual maturity that comes with that will manifest as the desire to be of service.
Yeah, but it can be frustrating when you're on the, as you call it in your book, Lion Tracker's Guide, you're on the path of not here.
Yes.
Where you go into whatever cave you go into or whatever, bush you go into, and you're like, oh, okay, there's no, what I was hoping was here wasn't here. I'm a failure. I'm turning around. Compared to, this is a brilliant part of the path.
We're in a state of discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, how would I describe that? All transformational processes have like a structure to them, and to live as a tracker, I say that if you're going to live as a tracker, a few things are going to happen. The first is that you're going to have to become comfortable with the unknown. So if you're at a place in your life, and I mean, you and I know this, how many people begin by saying, I'm lost or I'm stuck? Like, I want to do something. I just feel totally stuck. I don't know how to start. I don't know where to begin. Like, I'm just stuck. And the minute you feel stuck or lost in this culture, the pressure just goes exponential.
Yep.
Because the entire narrative of the culture is like, I know what I'm doing, high flying, like there's no space made for liminal spaces. There's no space made for the times of transition and uncertainty. So the first movement is almost always, I don't know, and that's okay.
And the issue with that is so many people are fronting.
Oh, exactly. Well, people are fronting because of how egoically challenging it is in this cultural narrative to be like in the I don't know state.
Yeah.
Whereas in traditional cultures, the descent, in this culture, it's all about the ascent. I'm going to the top of the pile. In traditional cultures, they understood that there are seasons of life for descent, and there are times of life for uncertainty and unknowing. And almost always the ability to commit to the vision of the beginning of the vision in the vision quest is not having the vision, So, gosh, the first movement of any transformational process is I don't know, and that's okay. I don't know. Like, actually just try to feel the way that your energy suddenly relaxes when you're melting down. You've had a catalytic event in your life. You've lost your job. Your relationship status has changed. What you thought it was going to be is not what it's going to be. Suddenly, it's not going to be what I thought it was going to be. I was starting this company. The company failed. And now I've gone back into, I don't know. If you can actually say, I don't know, and that's okay, you start to relax. Mm-hmm. And the pressure of like, what's the next thing subsides.
You release the extra baggage of judgment. And when you actually rest into the I don't know, almost always, and I've coached, hundreds and hundreds of people now, so I've seen it, almost always, the minute the real relaxation of I don't know comes in, something in you starts attuning to things. Mm-hmm. And I call that the development of track awareness. You as a tracker are starting to see what is important for you, and you'll start noticing things that give you energy. When I'm with these people, I get a bit more energy. When I'm with these people, I get less energy. I notice when I see these images, I feel myself expansive. Every time I see, I saw this book called The Align Method, and I just saw it, and I saw the way that, this guy was moving, and I saw like his approach, and something in me felt drawn to it. For example, but like people see images, they daydream about certain ways of being. They see other people who they think something about that person has something to do with me. Yeah.
Like right now, there's this incredible entrepreneur who just creates things by the name of Jesse Eisler. Yeah, and I just like when I see Jesse, something in me is like you, and I'm not trying to be Jesse. I just know that something about the way his vibe that he's living with is I'm drawn to, and so if people can become calm enough and start to attune to like, what are the things you feel naturally drawn to? What are you naturally curious about? Information starts to appear. It starts to come to you. And then normally the next phase is taking that information like, okay, I'm into movement, I'm into, storytelling, I'm into wellness, I'm into, now what do I have to do to practically start to create a life towards those things?
Yeah.
And so that's usually a very practical next phase where you have to sort of take these moving, interesting, curious awarenesses and say like, okay, how do I start moving my life practically towards that? And that's what I would call the first track,
So two things that I think are interesting and worth pointing out again. The first thing you mentioned, the visual that came up for me is, have you ever seen the picture of, it's like two statues in one way of looking at it, or you could look at it and you see like a face inside or something like that?
Yeah. Someone just showed me one of those, like, is the horse walking forward or backwards?
Right. Yeah. That's what we can do all the time with our perception, and the perception of having judgment for not knowing what we're doing with our lives or feeling maybe a little lost.
Mm-hmm.
That can go from a place of contraction and resistance, and then in an instance, it can go to a place of opportunity and abundance. Like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, that means I can do anything.
100%. That's exactly it. And it's powerful because, from the time that we were young in the schooling system, in the cultural narrative of this sort of social cultural milieu, you have to know, you have to know, you have to know, you have to know. And so anytime you don't know, it feels contractive. But if you were a tracker, I don't know is the doorway to, I'm on a journey of discovery. I'm in a state of discovery. So to go to where we started is, when the trackers lose the track, they will do two interesting things. One, they will go back to where they last had a clear track, or they will just start moving forward on the general direction of where they last had the tracks, trying things, discovering, checking open ground, looping around, anywhere where they think an animal might have walked. They're starting to just tune in and give themselves just total open, aware, creative discovery. And, again, I coached hundreds of people. This is not what people do. They tell me all the time in the early phases of coaching, well, when I know exactly what the next things to do are, then I'll start. When I'm 100% certain what my next move is in life, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I'll say, usually it's not that linear. And you start by doing something that takes you a little closer, and then that opens up something else, and you give yourself the space to try some things and get feedback, and actually, like, it doesn't need to be perfect. Just give yourself that room for discovery.
Yeah. Another thing you said that I thought was interesting, worth coming back to, is with Jesse Itzler. It's not the things that he does, but it's like the vibe that he emits that you're attracted to. And I think a lot of us, me, anybody, can be attracted to this specific thing and kind of neglect the feeling.
Totally. Yeah.
So there's I think a really powerful potential reframe there of just follow the vibe compared to the actual thing. And we're a very thing-based culture.
100%. And almost always, if you're living as a tracker, the first movements of it are going to be towards a feeling, because only the form of it will come later. I knew that someone had gifted me the art of learning how to heal. And there was immediately I knew that I wanted to be involved in that. I didn't know that I would have a coaching business. I didn't know that I would run retreats in South Africa. I didn't know that I would write books. I didn't know that I would travel the world telling stories. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that the feeling of being in a healing dynamic, the feeling of being in a transformational process, was allowing my system to feel energized and relaxed. And later, the ways that art form would express itself would come.
Yeah. But
first, it was the energy of it.
Can you tell us a story?
Sure.
There's a lot that I like, and I are you excited to tell a story? I don't want to prostitute you out for stories.
No, I'll tell you I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right now that the story, that story of the kudu is really traveling with me. So I'd like to tell that story if that's good.
Please.
So this is a story that I heard when I was very young around a campfire, and it's a story that's becoming more pertinent to me as my life goes on. And what's amazing about it is the first time I heard it, even though I was very young, something in me was incredibly attuned to the story. And in some ways, it's not a profoundly dramatic story, but there's something in the energy of it that grabbed me as a young boy. And in some ways, the energy that grabbed me in that story, I've been trying to make sense of it my whole life. And in some ways, the life I've lived is an attempt to try to answer the question of what occurs. So the story goes that there was a South African poet and writer by the name of Lawrence van der Post. And van der Post was a tremendous wordsmith, and he grew up in the Kalahari Desert. And he was raised by incredible Bushman trackers. And so he had a real affinity to the Bushman people and their way of life in the desert and their incredible art form of trackers. And so he grew up in the wild, really, and he was deeply attuned to nature. And then van der Post was sent to the Second World War. And he actually was in Java and those, the Indo-Pacific there. And then he was taken into a prisoner of war camp. He had a terrible time. And when van der Post returned from the war, he was deeply, deeply traumatized. But this was, of course, way before the years of diagnoses like PTSD. But something in him was profoundly shut down. And he knew it because he had a certain level of awareness, and he knew that he was in some ways damaged. He wanted to go and see his family, but he didn't believe that he could look his family in the face. He couldn't look into their eyes, given the things that he had seen and that he had done. He was deeply scarred by the war. And so instead, he decided that he would go and be alone in nature. He had this deep affinity to the wild. And so he packed up his gear and he walked out into the Kruger National Park, which is near the area where I grew up. And he set up a small camp, and he decided that he would just stay there for as long as it took. And on the first night, he had pitched his little tent, and he was sitting at the base of a small marula tree by a waterhole. And it was just coming into the evening, and the evening into the African night is absolutely beautiful. The birds call, hyenas start to call. There's the beginning of the night sounds, owls. It's just this dramatic feeling, and the night lying ahead of you, and beautiful orange sunset. And walking towards him on the other side of the waterhole came this male kudu. And the kudu is just a tremendously elegant antelope. It's tall, and it has these long, elegant limbs and these beautiful markings. And the males have these incredible spiraling horns that go up a meter into the air above their heads. Just dramatic, stag-like creature. And this kudu walked to the edge of the waterhole, and as antelopes tend to do, it looked around, incredibly nervous before they drink. And then very slowly it put its head down and it started to drink. And in Van der Post's journal, it says that it was so quiet around him in that wild place that he could hear the kudu drinking. And just then the wind touched his back, and it blew his scent across the waterhole. And the scent went directly into the kudu's nose, and it lifted its head up, and it has these huge saucer-like ears and these incredibly doe-like innocent eyes. And it looked directly at where the scent was coming from. And in a moment, it looked directly into Van der Post's eyes. And there was something about the silence and the elegance of this animal and the power of it and the beautiful softness of its gaze into his eyes, that in that moment he felt something inside of him move. And in an instant, he felt himself fully recovered from the PTSD of the war. It was almost like the animal transmitted an ancient innocence back into him, and it changed him. He felt the shift. And the next morning he was able to pack up and go and be with his family. And when I heard that story, my 8-year-old consciousness was something about that. And it's amazing actually how a part of us will always recognize what's for us if we can generate enough stillness and attention to be attuned to it, And so my life has been the attempt to answer that question on some level. Like, what is that? What is that occurred? And my understanding of it keeps evolving, but it has something to do with the power of relationality, something to do with how we recognize a deep truth of what we truly are in another, and the natural world is a scape of relationality. So if you can think about, like, let's say modern urban life, it's the opposite. It's like in an environment where the individual self is disconnected from the greater whole, the search for meaning is reduced to a constant state of comparison.
Yeah.
And like, so it comes to be like, how am I doing in comparison to everyone else? So my idea of how successful I am is about where I fit into this hierarchy, into comparison. And the feeling inside of that is that you are never quite there.
Yeah.
And you just need to coach your first billionaire to realize that, like, that's what we herald, but that ain't it either. It's just there's always somewhere else to be, something else to be doing, and someone else is doing it better. It's an overwhelming sense of not enoughness.
Yeah, it's the thief of joy.
Totally, that dynamic creates. The natural world, and the other thing is that there's an egoic dynamic to it too, where you objectify yourself. And so you are constantly objectifying how I am doing instead of just being you. There's a voice in you judging you. Now, the natural world is different to that, and I've felt this myself when I've lived long stretches alone. That starts to drop away, and instead, there's no self-judgment. There's no sense of being constantly judged from the outside or comparing, and in its place comes this incredible sense of relationality. Like, I am because of you, and we are. It's way more collective. And as I get to know the natural world around me, I start to feel myself as a part of a much larger family of being. And that feeling, instantly as you touch that place, a profound feeling of belonging comes into you.
Yeah.
And then a feeling of like, all of this is about me and I'm about all of this. We're making each other in some ways, and we're a gift to each other. The relationship itself is a tremendous state of psychological human healing, and it's how we were for thousands of years, feeling incredibly enough in relationship to each other, to the natural world, knowing that we are fundamental to each other's well-being.
What is from your perspective, the evolutionary function of a distrust of self, or chronic comparison, or alienation from self, from nature? Like, it has a purpose, or it wouldn't exist.
I don't know. It has a purpose, certainly in a consumeristic society, and that is to create, well, one, to keep you consuming on some level, and it formats you in a way that if you are playing that game of trying to get to the top of that social construct in that type of a society, then the foundation of it is scarcity. You should always do more, and you should compete against everyone else to get to the top, which is fine if that's the game you're playing.
It's a misinterpretation of Darwinism. Well, like, the primary tenets of Darwin's perspectives was cooperation. Like, that's what makes us king of the food chain or whatever.
Totally. But a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
That it's about actually, like, survival of the fittest has more to do with interrelationality than competitiveness.
And communication.
Exactly. And so I just, and look, I'm not knocking that game, If you want to play that game, that's fine, but I just know that the most successful people who I've coached, and I've coached a lot of people who've been incredibly financially successful and built huge things, and it always gets to the same place, which is, okay, those ideals that I was presented by the culture, either you don't achieve them and you always feel like there's something lacking in you, or you achieve them, and when you do, you realize that wasn't it.
Yeah.
And so you'll serve yourself well to let go of those ideals and start living towards the feeling. Then, I love the quote, people are not looking for the meaning of life, they're looking for the feeling of being alive. And so there's a way that you can get out of that and start living towards something different. Just start there. And that is always going to have to do with relationality, with being internally connected with things that make you feel energized and alive, starting to learn what your unique gifts are and share them, and coming into a state of enoughness. If you work out how to find your way to that, on some level, the other stuff starts to take care of itself, but relationality is at the core of it. And I think we're living in a time where we're longing for it. We're hungry for it.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly it's been worth work doing for me.
What is presently challenging for you?
Well, I've just actually been through a huge state of a recalibration, of a meltdown into the unknown. There are certain ways that I've built my life that are not working anymore. And so currently I'm asking myself what the next iterations are for me and how to rebuild a relational field that feels supportive to me. A big factor of that is, I've been living as a traveling storyteller for a long time, and I can feel very subtly that way of living is starting to, I'm starting to go into diminishing returns there. And so now I have to start saying, okay, well, where do I want to anchor myself? How does that reshape my work? What does that mean for me on a relationship front? Because I haven't been in relationship for a while. So all of those things, it's like, what does the next phase of my life look like? This is really working. This is working, but there's this subtle sense that something is changing internally, and I need to follow that, because if I don't consistently live on those tracks and that sense of inner guidance, then I have nothing to share.
Yeah.
You got to live it to give it.
As far as ways that humans can start to maybe downregulate or soothe their nervous system or process some old stuff, it seems like the environment that we exist in isn't really facilitative for that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we were talking about at dinner the other day was the value of, like, I wrote at least part of my whole book is about getting down on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that opens up to more playfulness, that opens up to more physical touch,
Mm-hmm.
Just physical touch in general, like people being resistant to, having a hug, or
Mm-hmm.
what does it mean? It's just like sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that people can do in a modern world to start to introduce some more like natural human lifestyle choices to just organically start to soothe the nervous system just through their passive existence?
Totally. I mean, there's a few things that come to mind. The one thing that I would say is go out into nature as much as possible, so you need to put your attention on alive, living things. Amazing thing happens when you do that. You must generate some kind of stillness practice. So some opportunity to learn to go inwards as your attention is getting pulled outwards. As much as possible, do one thing at a time. You can imagine, like, we're driving in our car, listening to a podcast, texting on the phone. Like, it's dissipative. One thing that I really discover when I live in nature for long periods of time with no tech is I do one thing at a time. When I'm cooking, I'm cooking. When I cut the wood, I cut the wood. When I need to, fix the tarpaulin in the camp, when I need to go collect the water. And the quality of my attention changes so radically out of that. So that's certainly one thing. The other thing that I would say, which is sort of what we touched on, is when I started running ceremony work, we were doing a style of work that it had a lot to do with breaking out of the isolation of this culture. And so the ceremony was not like lie alone on your mat and have your own process. The ceremony was come together in a contained space where people can be on the floor, comfortably. And then as the ceremony would unfold, this incredible thing would happen slowly over time. Everyone being on the floor around a fire, people processing things, sometimes using medicine, sometimes not. But there would be a natural kind of primate-like level of connection that would happen. People would start touching each other. People would lie up against each other. Someone's like would have their head on someone's leg. And now from the outside, you might not know what was going on there, but in fact, something incredibly important is happening. When that is going on, people are learning a new language. Yeah. And it's a language of energy and connection. And they're learning how people are meant to be together. There's a physicality to that. There's a rhythm to that. There's a connection to that is totally lost in our times where you go to work every day and you go, hello, like we're meant to be tactile. We're meant to be in shared spaces, in close physical, non-sexual proximity. There's an incredible amount of intimacy in learning how to be that way. And that is so important to us. And when we're starved of it, the romantic relationship and the sexual relationship becomes absolutely critical.
Yeah.
If you go hunt an animal with a group of men, old school, we're going to spear something. The result of that is you are deeply physically in each other's space. You pick things up together. You're up against each other. You carry it. You have to help. There's like a physicality and a connection to that is like totally lost. And so men are starved for that kind of physical contact in this culture. You might get it in contact sports and you might get it in sexual encounters. But there's like a whole range of ways that we were meant to be physically connected. And it's incredible. I loved your insight that the minute you go down onto the ground, the nature of that changes.
Yeah.
Like something happens when you go down a level, and now we can play at a different level. And play is another thing that you start to see almost always in ceremony work. It goes from people feeling separate to a different way of being physically connected, into grief, deep processes, and then it almost always ends in a state of play. People start just talking lightly, trying things. There's a natural laughter that it develops, and it's an old way of being that is largely lost. And so a huge part of what I was doing is just teaching the art of being together in really deep and connected and safe ways.
Yeah, I feel like we're very confused about how to be together, particularly in the realm of touch, because it's almost like we go from zero, just completely deprived, to sex,
100%,
penetration.
yeah.
And then that liminal space between there, it's just this open vacancy. And then that leads to a lot of toxic expressions and a lot of shame and a lot of avoidance. And it's literally learning a language of connection.
And once you know that language, what's amazing about it is it's almost universal. So if you have some sense of that language and you go to a ceremony space almost anywhere where people know how to be with each other at that level, it's instant. You could drop into it across cultural barriers, across different societal structures. If they know that way of being, you can enter very quickly into a different level of connection with people.
Yeah, then you can co-regulate.
You immediately start co-regulating.
Yeah, if someone's in touch with themselves, then you can come into the room and they can be like a Martha Beck kind of situation where it's like, oh, I feel
totally
you. And maybe you don't want to be felt, in which case that's fine. And I can feel that you don't want to be felt and I'll respect that and I'll back out. But I'm here for that part of you.
Totally.
If you'd like to be there with it.
And there are certain healing processes that cannot happen at a verbal level. Mm-hmm. And so in this society, you go off to the therapist and you talk therapy. But, some of the experiences that we need to heal are archetypal encounters with certain kinds of holding. Archetypal encounters, so that would be tend to be more maternal stuff. Then the feeling of just being up against another strong masculine body, and that feeling of support. There's a father mentor dynamic there that you can get to at a way deeper level than I'm going to be your chatty mentor. I feel your body next to mine. I never had that. There are so many things that we didn't get that you can repattern the minute you get onto the floor in a space that is well facilitated. And you can learn there in ways. People can feel safe there in ways that is just so much deeper than the verbal mind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
And hopefully we can do this again, because I would love to. Now we're like, the beginning of the conversation was unpacking all like the important things that I wanted to address, and then this is the beginning of the chapter of what I'd really like to talk about.
Let's do it again. Yeah, let's do it again.
Your book, Lion, is it called Lion Tracker's Guide or Guide?
The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. Yeah, that's a beautiful,
excellent
a single story, morning till evening, tracking a lion and what that can teach us about finding what we're looking for.
Yeah.
When's your book coming out?
The next one?
Yeah.
Probably, I'd say 1.5 years would be my guesstimation. Okay. We're in proposal mode right now.
Okay. I can't wait for that, man. It sounds fascinating.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Is there any other, people can go on a freaking tracking guide safari?
We run retreats. Safari? Yeah, we run tracking retreats in South Africa, and you can go to boydvarty.com if you want to find out more about tracking your life.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That is it. That is all. Over and out.
Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Leave us a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, remember to subscribe so you get each week's episodes. If you enjoyed this, you might also enjoy the episode with Bruce Lipton as well as Gabor Mate. Hope you guys have a beautiful week, and I will see you very soon.